We're going to move on. I'm going to talk about, of course, the conquest of America today, which kind of a very famous event in, I guess, in world history, but really, I guess, American history, if you want to go into that also as well. So we'll talk about how the conquistadors came into the Americas. They pretty much were the ones that spearheaded a lot of the colonization of the Americas that would happen, especially in Latin America, more than anything. Of course, first talk about some of the early conquistadors that came in, of course, into the Americas. Of course, the ones that you see right here, of course, Hernan Cortes, of course, and Francisco Pizarro. Those two really are the most famous of the conquistadors that really come into the Americas. I think they were probably the most successful overall in the end. But let me first talk about, what was the La Conquista, which, by the way, that's the name that the Spanish called it, the Conquest, as they called it. Who were the conquistadors? Well, a lot of the conquistadors were mercenaries. They were soldiers. Some were not even actually that either. But a lot of these were Spanish, also Portuguese, that conquered different parts of the world. The Americas, primarily, they're most famous. They went into Africa. Yeah, they went into India, pretty much East Indies, and parts of Asia. So that's basically, most of them were obsessed with, obviously seeking wealth. They wanted gold, they wanted lands to conquer, slaves, etc. Of course, they're the ones that pretty much would spearhead, the conquest of the Americas, which of course I'll talk a lot about today. Of course, Cortes, who, by the way, go back to this picture over my right shoulder right there, was really the most famous of the conquistadors, probably the most successful. He conquered Mexico, later, as you know. Cortes was the one that famously said, "We Spaniards know a sickness of the heart that only gold can cure." That pretty much summed up, the conquistadors overall. They're obsessed with, trying to seek gold, silver, riches, and things like that overall. I'm also going to talk about some other things, of course, that were famous, about, the early conquistadors that were there. A lot of them were searching for, like these so-called lost cities of gold. I think those are some of the things that they kind of started to hear about, like in the Iberian Peninsula in Europe. They started seeing gold coming in. A lot of these men, they wanted to seek fortunes on their own. And so a lot of them were fueled by these various legends of lost cities of gold, which one of was the El Dorado story you may have heard about, which El Dorado in Spanish means the golden man or the gilded man. And it was this belief that there was some kind of lost city of gold that was ruled by a famous king in the Americas, preferably South America, I think is where a lot of the Spanish thought he was. In fact, the actual El Dorado is the actual king, where the name comes from. And so a lot of Spanish wanted to go there and, seek it and all that. And of course, made a lot of movies. I think Disney's made some movies about it. You may have seen like The Road to El Dorado, just kind of famous, I guess, now, but kind of been, I think, criticized later about it. But and then they had another one that was real popular, which they think may have actually an idea that came from, I think, the old world, which was the Cibola, or the so-called Seven Cities of Gold, Cibola y Quivira, which I think was the Spanish name that they called it. And it was this idea of these so-called native seven cities of gold that was in the Americas. I think they thought it was in like North America, a lot of the Spanish, like Coronado, who sought it. Anyway, they think it was actually an idea that was influenced by stories in the old world. Like I think there was one story which I told you about, like the Prester John legend, which may have actually been one of the influences of it, they think. Oh, and back to El Dorado, you had like men like, I don't know if you heard of Orellana. He was this famous conquistador, Francisco de Orellana, in 1540s. He was a good example of an early conquistador that searched for like El Dorado, which was actually, he went into the Amazon jungle, exploring the Amazon River, which he was one of the first to do. And then Coronado searched for something similar, of course, we've talked about as well. Now, I think there was even a case where you heard of Sir Walter Raleigh. I think he even searched for El Dorado in the late 16th century. So all these different people that kind of search for so-called lost cities of gold, etc. Now, I'm going to first, of course, talk about some of the different explorers that were famous. Of course, one of the first that you had, of course, that we kind of see kind of come into the Americas, that's kind of famous. It's Juan Ponce de Leon, who, by the way, was later governor of Puerto Rico. And little background about Juan Ponce de Leon. He was not just a conquistador, he was an explorer for the Spanish. And he came actually with Christopher Columbus's second voyage to the Americas. This is basically in the 1490s. And he helped conquer Puerto Rico, which is, to the east of Hispaniola, where the Dominican Republic is. Anyway, he was later put in charge as the governor of Puerto Rico. And apparently on the island, there were some natives that told him about some kind of fountain of youth that existed, which is one of the most famous things, associated with Juan Ponce de Leon, so-called fountain of youth. It was believed that if you drank from this water, you would live forever or eternal youth or something like that. And so I think they told him it was in a place called Bimini, which some people thought was in the Bahamas. And so he sailed up into there with a fleet of ships. Of course, some people thought they may have been talking about the Mayan culture, of course, in the Yucatan, like in Central America, Mexico, but they're not sure. But anyway, sailed up into that area, and of course, as you know, he found Florida 1513, which you can see there, and explored it twice, 1513 and also later in 1521. And on the second voyage, of course, he was later killed I think he was shot by some Native Americans with an arrow, later died right afterwards. But it's believed that if you look at that map, that Juan Ponce de Leon, they think explored the east coast of Florida. They think he also sailed up the west coast of Florida as well. There's been a debate about how far he went, but he may have also gone all the way up into maybe where the panhandle is of Florida today. So that's basically the story, of course, of Juan Ponce de Leon. Now, they have another famous conquistador that comes later, which is Balboa. Of course, the full name is Vasco Nunez de Balboa. He's another famous explorer that was also a conquistador that was in search of gold, in search of riches, and he's very, very famous, of course, for being one of the first Spanish to go into Central America, like what is Panama, which is right above Colombia in South America. And apparently in 1513, he basically took about almost 200 men, and he crossed the Isthmus of Panama. And of course, one of the things that he was famous for, Balboa, was, of course, discovering the Pacific Ocean. And he didn't really call it that. If you know about it, Ferdinand Magellan, a few years later, around 1520, would call it, Pacific, peaceful sea, or Mar Pacifico. And the name he called it was the South Sea, or if you want the Spanish, it's Mar del Sur, is what he called it. And so that's one of the names that they often called it. And you can see he even explored kind of south of Panama. I think it's called the Pearl Islands. And so he was actually at one point the mayor and also a governor of Panama. And one of the first to explore that area in Central America. And so later, the Spanish are going to use that area where Panama is as a springboard to invade into South America, like Peru, which Pizarro will do in like around the 1530s, a little later. So that's Balboa, what he's famous for, discovering the Pacific Ocean as the first European to do so. Now, another explorer, which most people don't really talk much about, but I usually kind of get into a little bit, since we're talking about the conquistadors and all that in the Americas, they have Panfilo de Narvaez. He's kind of a conquistador that was, he was kind of involved in an expedition to explore Florida and try to colonize it. But Narvaez was a conquistador that went back to like the 1520s. He was involved in some expeditions to conquer Mexico with Hernan Cortes, which is a little later. Anyway, what happened was after Ponce de Leon's expedition failed, they sent Narvaez with about something like, they say it's like 500 men, was how many people were involved in this expedition. And anyway, what happened was the expedition got wiped out by a storm, probably a hurricane, likely. And so about 4 men survived, which the most famous of the 4 men was a man named Cabeza de Vaca, which means, by the way, the head of a cow. His full name was Alvar Nunez, Cabeza de Vaca, they called him. And I think there's a picture showing de Vaca, and of course the route or journey of this expedition. So you can see they came up into the Gulf of Mexico. They landed actually where Tampa Bay is. You can see in that map, there's actually an area called the Bay of Horses in Tampa Bay. And apparently they lost all their horses, which is bad. They tried to sail westward, but they got hit by a hurricane, likely. And most of their fleet got wiped out. And they ended up where Galveston Island is, where, southern part of Texas today. And what happened was Cabeza de Vaca and the 4 men that survived, they got actually captured by Indians, and they were enslaved for like a few years, believe it or not. And eventually they survived, and I think they escaped, and they started walking westward towards Mexico to try to reach Europeans that might be down there. And so de Vaca is famous for being one of the first Europeans to kind of explore that area, like Texas, Mexico, northern Mexico at that time. And he actually gave one of the first accounts of a lot of the Native American cultures that live in that area. In fact, they kind of consider de Vaca to be almost like a proto-anthropologist, studying about these Indian cultures and learning their languages, which he did, by the way. Cabeza de Vaca eventually wrote a book, which has got different names. The account of Cabeza de Vaca, I think, is one name. Or if you want the Spanish name, it was published in 1542, La Relation de Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca, which I think La Relation means the account, basically. Or some say the journey, you want to call it that, or adventure of Cabeza de Vaca. And this book was influential. In fact, it influenced other explorers, like I think probably Coronado, I know the most, was influenced by his travels and all that. And so I think when the Spanish found Cabeza de Vaca, they thought he was an Indian, believe it or not, because he knew the languages and they had been missing so long that they thought they were dead. So kind of an interesting story about Cabeza de Vaca and his, of course, famous exploration into the interior of the Americas. One of the first Europeans to, of course, do that. All right. Now, of course, they also have another famous explorer, the Spanish, a conquistador, named, of course, Hernando de Soto, who lived in the early 16th century. He was pretty famous conquistador, de Soto. In fact, very wealthy and successful. He was known later for exploring the southern part of the United States, kind of like doing what Capisa de Vaca was kind of trying to do in that area there. But he was known for a lot of different things. De Soto before, in fact, De Soto goes back to like the 1520s, when, going back to like the time of Cortes and all that, I guess, at the time. But 1520s, De Soto was involved in conquering parts of Central America, like Nicaragua, where he helped another conquistador named Francisco Cordoba conquer Nicaragua in that area, south of the Yucatan. And after that, he went into the Yucatan above that and explored that area as well. And then probably his most famous thing that De Soto did before he went into the area of North America, he was involved in helping Francisco Pizarro conquer Peru in the 1530s. So that's something that he was kind of involved in, De Soto, and I think got very wealthy off a lot of these, conquests and explorations at the time. And so after the, Ponce de Leon and, of course, the thing with the Narvaez expedition failing, that's why they sent De Soto, of course, into basically that part of North America where the United States is today. So, yeah, you can see the route they took with this expedition. You can see they basically landed where Tampa Bay is again on that west coast of Florida. And his expedition went up into what is like the northern part of Florida, close to the Panhandle, of course, where Tallahassee is now, the capital of Florida now. And you can see all the areas that De Soto would explore on his expedition. Going up into Georgia, also into South Carolina, North Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas, Louisiana, maybe, and then part of eastern Texas. So pretty much all the, I guess, Gulf South now, as we call it now, is areas that he explored at one point. Yeah, they think he may have crossed the Mississippi River where Memphis, Tennessee is. 1541, roughly, I think is the year. Now today, there's a famous bridge there, which is called the Hernando de Soto Bridge, which is part of Interstate 40, going from Arkansas into Memphis, Tennessee. And so there's a lot of things named after De Soto, which, of course, are all over the United States today. So, so-called Hernando de Soto Bridge you're looking at in that image. The only thing about De Soto, if you go back, of course, to that map there, they think he died somewhere close to maybe the eastern part of Arkansas, they believe. And it's believed that De Soto died of natural cause. Some kind of illness killed him off. And they buried him in the river because they didn't want the Native Americans to know that De Soto wasn't. They told him he was a god. I guess they wouldn't get attacked or whatever. So anyway, I'm going to move on next. We're going to talk about also another famous conquistador, which is Coronado, who I kind of mentioned earlier before as well. Coronado, a little bit of information about him. He was a governor of like northern Mexico. This is kind of after Cortes had conquered Mexico at that time. And you can see he lived in the early 16th century mostly. And eventually he would be involved in expeditions where he would try to conquer part of like southwestern regions of now what is now the United States, which he was involved in some expeditions in the early 1540s overall. He was actually a governor of a state called New Galicia, which is kind of like up in the northwestern part of Mexico, is where it is. And they think that Coronado was influenced by Cabeza de Vaca, who had, just come back from those expeditions I told you about, where they were in part of North America. And I guess he had that book that he heard about that Cabeza de Vaca had written And so he thought that maybe what Conquistador was talking about, some of these Indians that were there, they might be part of the so-called um, lost cities of gold, like Cibola. And so Coronado got together an expedition which included something like 300 something conquistadors, like soldiers. Over 1,000 Indians were also involved as well. They started pushing up into the southwestern parts of the United States. I do have a map showing, of course, the route of Coronado's expedition. You can see it came up through the northwestern part of Mexico, but some of his men traveled through the Gulf of California. Not the first to do that. Hernan Cortes had discovered the Gulf of California a few years before. You can see they came up through what is like the southeastern part of Arizona, through the San Pedro River Valley, and pushed into Arizona, and then also eastward into New Mexico. And anyway, Coronado encountered these Native Americans that were called Pueblo Indians, which live in the Southwest, such as the Zuni or the Hopi, who were famous for, by the way, living in these adobe mud hut type villages, which the Spanish called Pueblo. And so the name kind of stuck afterwards. And he thought all of those people were basically part of Cibola that were there. And there's a funny story about this. Apparently, he found this Indian that the Spanish called the Turk. The Turk, they called him. And the Turk basically became his main guide, and they basically took him eastward. And apparently, they think the Turk was trying to lead them away from where all the villages were, and told the Spanish that all the gold and silver was to the east. And so you can see here in this map here that Coronado kept going eastward into the Great Plains, reaching through northern Texas, Oklahoma, and then all the way to the Kansas River, where Kansas is, in the plains regions, of course, Great Plains right there. And there was an Indian village there he found in the spring of 1541, which he called Quivera, thinking that was one of maybe the cities. But he got mad at the Turk and killed him because they realized that there was no gold. So they killed the guy, of course. Coronado was ruthless, by the way, very, very ruthless man. He basically killed a lot of people. A lot of Indians were killed when they wouldn't tell them where the gold was. And I think if they wouldn't convert to Christianity on the spot, they also killed them as well too. So he was kind of brutal, Coronado. If you study about him, but he was one of the first to explore that part of the world. In North America. There is something he did find, which is very famous, which you probably have heard about this before, but Coronado was one of the first conquistadors to discover the Colorado River Basin and the Grand Canyon, which there was actually this conquistador that led an expedition into it named Garcia Lopez de Cardenas. He's the guy that found it. And there is, of course, the famous Grand Canyon, which some of the Spanish were in awe of it. Wow, it's just, so huge, this big canyon that's there. But other Spanish were like, they weren't impressed with it because they couldn't find any gold. So they said, let's move on from there. But now, of course, the Grand Canyon, is big tourist attraction, of course, today. Big hole in the ground, as they call it now. It's amazing that people still fall down into it, but they do. Like tourists go there and they fall down and kill themselves. Just like I think if you fall off there, it's like a mile drop, to the bottom. So that's the story, of course, of Coronado. Of course, now I'm going to get into next, and we're going to talk about one of the main conquistadors today. That's really the most famous overall that we'll talk about, and of course, that's the famous man named Hernan Cortes, the so-called conqueror of Mexico, and Cortes, was very, very famous for not just conquering Mexico, but really defeating one of the probably one of the two major states in the Americas that was really powerful. You had the Aztec Empire, which was in central Mexico. Of course, the Inca Empire that was in Peru, that Pizarro would conquer, of course, in South America. But Cortes became probably the most famous of the conquistadors overall. Got very wealthy off of it. And a little background about Cortes. He was born in Medellin, Spain, which is kind of like in the western part of Spain today. It's kind of a major city there. A lot of conquistadors kind of came from that area or the southwestern part of Spain that went to the Americas. So did Pizarro, which I think there's a theory that Pizarro was kind of a distant cousin of Cortes. And he wasn't really a trained soldier. Not all the conquistadors, were soldiers, mercenaries, that kind of thing. He was actually a student that was studying law, believe it or not. And he heard about, all the discoveries of the Americas and decided to go get on a ship and go to the New World and try to seek his fortune and all that. So anyway, yeah, Cortes, like I said, he arrived in the Americas a few years before that. Like he first went to Cuba and Hispaniola, those islands. And there, of course, he heard about Mexico, what was going on with that there. The Spanish, I think, at that point had gone into the Yucatan. And so he had a small force that he actually brought with him. I think it was a few hundred men, basically. And they invaded the Yucatan. And I think when they got there, they wanted to leave, by the way. They were kind of scared, So if you know about Cortes, what he did, he destroyed all their boats, so they couldn't go back to the Caribbean. So anyway, he actually met this. Here's, of course, another image, of course, of Hernan Cortes right there. There was a famous slave girl that he got when he was in the Yucatan, who was kind of vital in conquering Mexico. She goes by different names. The Spanish called her Donna Marina. Some people call her La Malinche. I think it means the captain's woman, I think is the translation of it. Or Malincet, I think is another name she's known by. And she, of course, was very famous. She was actually Maya, and she knew the Mayan language and also Nahuatl, which, of course, is the language of the Aztecs. And when he invaded, if you know about this, the Aztec Empire was this empire, which you see there in the map, that was located in central Mexico. It's kind of like the so-called Valley of Mexico, they call it. You can see it's kind of west of the Gulf of Mexico. I see Veracruz, east coast, where they think that Cortes came ashore right there as he came up from the Yucatan. And then you can see the actual route that Cortes would take from the east coast of Mexico, of course, into central Mexico. And the Aztecs were like a Native American alliance of different Native American tribes that were living in central Mexico. They're called different names. They're, of course, the Nahuatl people, Aztec or Azteca. I think Mexica is even used also as well, which a lot of these people are still around. Their language is still used today in parts of Mexico. And the ruler of Mexico, of course, I'll show you the city. That's the capital, of course, that he would eventually conquer later, which is Tenochtitlan, which Tenochtitlan is, of course, located where now Mexico City is. In fact, the ruins of Tenochtitlan, later Mexico City was built on top of. And the city itself was very famous for being built on an island. There's a lake around it called Lake Texcoco, it's called, which is, I think, been mostly drained out later by the Spanish. And there were actually causeways that ran to it. And supposedly Tenochtitlan was considered to be one of the most, I guess, advanced cities in the world, like in the new world anyway. At the time, I think that and Cusco in South America, of course, where the Incas are later. And one of the most famous events, of course, that would occur in his, conquest of Mexico that you hear about is the fact that when Cortes meets one of the last emperors of the Aztecs, which is the Emperor Montezuma. I think they all say Moctezuma. It's spelled different ways. Montezuma. But he was the ruler of the state that was, like I said, based in central Mexico today, Tenochtitlan. That's where he ruled from as a ruler. And he had been reigning 20 years or so as the ruler. And I suppose he was kind of unpopular somewhat. I think the Spanish claimed that the people didn't really like him as a ruler. Maybe he was a tyrant or whatever. But there's supposedly a deal where the two would meet. There's a famous meeting between them that occurs on the date of November 8th, 1519. And as Dale Dye was talking about in that short little video clip, some of the Aztecs thought that Cortes was a god. There was, of course, this belief that Cortes was this god they called Quetzalcoatl, the so-called feather serpent god of the Aztecs. And there was a legend that he had been this Aztec god that had been exiled from Mexico, and that one day he would return. And supposedly he looked like a white European person with a beard. Like he had a chalky white face and all that. And so for some reason they thought Cortes, was this god that was returning. And so Cortes was actually, when he went into the city, they welcomed him with open arms, thinking he was, of course, a god. Some other pictures. Of course, there's a lot of different paintings or murals that have been done of course, the two meeting of the worlds between, the new world and the old world that you're looking at. And here's kind of a picture showing you this right here. But there's a famous hospital in Mexico City called the Hospital de Jesus Nazareno, I think full name. It's in Mexico City. And supposedly the site of where Cortes met Montezuma. It's right there. Of course, if you know about the hospital, it was later built by Hernan Cortes on the site where the two met. Here's kind of the upstairs part of it right there, but that's basically kind of a courtyard area. And they've got some actual mural paintings that they've actually painted inside, which depict the meeting between the two sides right there. What happens is Cortes basically he actually takes Montezuma hostage, and I think what happened was Montezuma had put Cortes up in his palace, and Cortes and his men basically kidnapped him. They basically put a gun to his head and said, "If you don't do what I say, we're going to kill you." And so Montezuma basically became this puppet, ruler for Cortes. And Cortes basically just tried to take over the Aztec Empire. Is what he does. However, there's something that happens. Of course, the people get wind of it. If you know about this, about what occurs with Cortes. And there's Montezuma right there, and you can see the famous Quetzalcoatl, of course, god, the feather serpent god that you're looking at right there. But what happens is the Aztecs rebel in a few months later, about late June 30th, I think is the famous date, 1520. Because of the fact that they know now Cortes is taken over and Montezuma is like just basically not the same ruler like he was originally, and so the Aztecs basically rebel against him. And what happens is Cortes and his men try to get out. I think they're halfway across the causeway right there in that image, and they get attacked by the Aztecs, and something like 800 men or more will actually get killed. Trying to fight their way out of the city of Tenochtitlan. And the Spanish later called it La Noche Triste, which, if you want to know the Spanish for that, it means the night of sorrows or the sad night. And there's a tree right there at the top right. It's called the Tree of Sad Night, which is in Mexico City today. That's supposedly the location of where Cortes reached that spot after he had, I guess, made it, over the causeway there, and he cried next to the tree, realized that he had lost the city at that point. But if you know what happens later, he's able to come back. If you know about it, there were a lot of Native Americans in Mexico that didn't like the Aztecs. Like I kind of talked about, some people didn't like Montezuma and the Aztecs. And there was one city that was above, like a state that was called Tlaxcala, and they hated the Aztecs. And so they put up thousands of Indian warriors to fight against Montezuma. Montezuma's killed at that point, but Montezuma's empire there. And so what happens is Cortes actually builds a fleet of ships, and he lays siege to actually the Lake Texcoco, where the city of Tenochtitlan is, and the siege will last something like 75 days or more, like 2.5 months, from about May to August 1521. And, the Native Americans, like that culture, had never seen siege warfare before. They had never experienced that. And it was just like house by house, basically going through and just sacking it, destroying the city, killing a lot of people. And so I forget the number of people that were killed. Some say 40,000, maybe more. Aztecs may have been killed. A lot of atrocities were committed, by Cortes on the Spanish when they conquered Mexico, as you know. I think the Tlaxcalans wanted to be on the right side of history is what it was. They didn't want to end up like the Aztecs, and so that's why they supported that point. But yeah, the fall of Tenochtitlan, that kind of, that allows the Spanish to conquer Mexico and add that to their colonial possessions that are slowly, becoming what they call later New Spain, because they'll take, Tenochtitlan and they'll build, of course, Mexico City on top of the ashes of the old Aztec capital that's there today. So that's basically what happens, with but where's Pizarro? We won't talk about it today too much about Pizarro, but I did want to get into for a few minutes and talk about Pizarro. Pizarro, of course, will later also conquer part of the Americas as well. Pizarro, he is going to, of course, be the one that is involved in conquering, of course, the Inca Empire, which the Inca Empire was even, they say bigger, than the Aztec one. They say that was the one that was the most impressive one out of all the different Native American states that were in, I guess, the Americas at the time. And Pizarro actually, if you study about him, he actually came with Balboa. So he was involved in the discovery of the Pacific Ocean as well. Later, he would help to found like cities like Panama City, which, if you know about that, is now the capital of Panama today, which is like right above South America, right there where the Panama Canal is and all that. And so when he was there, he heard about this, Inca Empire that was to the south. And there's a famous story, you may have heard about this, where apparently he and his men got, I think they were on a deserted island or something off the coast of South America right there. And anyway, a lot of his men wanted to go back to Panama. They were like, this is not working out for us. We want to go home, that kind of thing. And so he made a famous speech that became well known, of course, Pizarro, which was this. He said, "There lies Peru with its riches, here Panama and its poverty. Choose each man what best becomes a brave Castilian." And of course, they say, of course, you know about the, you drew a line in the sand right there. You can see only 13 men, by the way, crossed over to join Pizarro. and all that. And so it would take him years, to conquer, Peru and all that by the 1530s. But he and Cortes really are the two most famous out of all the different conquistadors. So that's going to end my part one lecture, of course, this week. I'll kind of get later on Wednesday, part two lecture. I'll get more into Pizarro, his conquests of Peru. Also, I'll talk about what happens afterwards. The Spanish, are going to start to carve colonies out of the New World, especially in Latin America, which they're often called the viceroyalties of Spain. Portugal had the same thing. They had the viceroyalty of Portugal as well, which especially included Brazil in it. So I'll kind of talk about that. I'll kind of talk about how the Spanish, mistreat a lot of the Native Americans. If you know about this, they have this thing called the encomienda system, which was really cruel in the Americas. It was almost like slave labor, pretty much. And besides a lot of the natives dying of diseases like smallpox or whatever, a lot of them were also worked to death. Plantations, mines, things like that overall. So we'll talk about that, like I said, later in the week. I'll send out, announcements later, of course, about that. But before we go, don't forget, I was talking about, I think, an assignment we had, which I know is the expiration quiz that I've got. That's, I think, due later. I want to say later at the end of the week sometime. I know when that'll probably be due overall. But that's, I know, a main assignment that we have for y'all to work on. Vocab, I don't think it's due this week, but I know like next week we'll have that, of course, coming up. So y'all have a great weekend coming up. A great week coming up overall for y'all. Yeah, weekend later. I wish it was the weekend coming up more than anything. But y'all have a great week pretty much. And I'll see y'all, of course, later overall. So y'all take care, of course, and have a great one. I'll see y'all later.